social contract. The article is from caseyresearch.com, and the headline is, "The social contract is a fraud. Anyone trying to enforce it is acting criminally."
Okay.
By Paul Rosenberg. He says, when you hear the word social, it's even money that you're being snookered. Social justice, for example, is primarily a ruse for penalizing individuals without any finding of fact as to their individual guilt. Whether you actually did anything deserving a penalty is irrelevant. It's social. And if you question the deal, you're a bad person.
Well, I would like to say on social justice, I've trotted this out in a few Quaker forums on Facebook that essentially social justice is just a code word for stealing money from people.
Now, the Quakers are into social justice, right?
They tend to be, yeah.
But they're also supposedly not into having one man above another.
Apparently, there is some form of social justice in the minds of some people out there that doesn't have to do with government intervention in any way. So whatever that is, I'm for it.
Okay.
Because it's voluntary and peaceful.
But they've never been able to. But they've never been able to explain it to you because you don't know what it is.
They've explained it to me. Like whatever their concepts are is fine. Like consider that social justice is whatever, some sort of equality that they see or whatever. Rich people giving their money voluntarily to help poor people or something, and that social justice, when instituted by the government, is rich people having their money taken from them by force and given to poor people. Like there's a difference in some people's minds when it comes to social justice. And the author here says not every time. He just says most times. Right?
He says it is primarily a ruse.
There you go.
So, going on, he says the granddaddy of all the social scams, however, is the social contract. That's what replaced the divine right of kings in the 17th and 18th centuries when it was falling apart. This is, in Wikipedia's slightly edited words, quote, "a theory or model that addresses the questions of the origin of society and the legitimacy of the authority of the state over the individual," unquote. In other words, this was the new explanation of why it's right for one group of men to rule over other men. Wikipedia continues, quote, "Arguments typically posit that individuals have consented, either explicitly or tacitly, to surrender some of their freedoms and submit to the authority of the ruler in exchange for protection of their remaining rights," unquote. And, of course, as we know, just to interject here, as we know, there is no deal. The protection isn't there, first of all. If they protect you, it's only because it'll make them look good to protect you. If they don't protect you, there's no obligation to do so. And because there's no obligation for them to protect, there can be no obligation for you to be obliged to them.
Yeah, I think it's really important to flesh that out a little bit. The Supreme Court has ruled, and I think in most recently in a case where two women were being raped over the course of something like 48 hours.
Oh, that's an old case.
Yeah, but that's
They've
most
ruled
recent.
since then.
Since then? Okay, great.
They rule this all the time.
There is an instance where two women were being raped over the course of 48 hours.
Warren versus District of Columbia.
They called the police on multiple occasions, and the police kind of drove by and looked and didn't see nothing and left. It must not be serious this third time they've called. And the same thing kept happening, and the Supreme Court ruled that no, they don't have an obligation to protect you, and if they did, they'd be forced to make good, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you hire an insurance company to protect your stuff, you pay a certain premium, and if it gets stolen or damaged or whatever, there's
an actual contract there too. When you have an insurance company,
absolutely.
You can read the terms.
You can read the terms. They have to pay you back. The police, they fail to protect you. Nothing happens because they have no obligation to protect.
Yeah, but do you think that they know that they have no obligation to protect you? I think most police are operating under the assumption that it's their job to protect you, aren't they?
I think they may think it's their job and that they may have to perform at a certain level. But we have heard, we heard somebody call in that was talking. I think he was a rookie cop, or he was telling the story of a friend who was a rookie cop or something like that. And he's like, knife fight at 34th and 5544 34th Street. And, he's like, getting ready to go. He's sitting in the partner's car. He's like, come on. And the partner's like,
whoa,
what?
Hold on there, buddy.
You got a family member there? And he said, no. Well, we're just going to wait a little while here. You don't want to get in the middle of it. Yeah. And essentially, Now that's the story he told. I'm not claiming.
It's a good story.
I'm not claiming that story is true or false in that instance. I will, however, claim There are police officers that act that way simply because statistically there must be police officers that act that way. And
it's also self-interested. I mean,
if somebody's incentivized to act in a certain fashion, which is to say, it's not like the courts are going to go after you for it.
Yeah.
And obviously, if you're a police officer, you never show up when they call you. That's not going to work out. But if you're like, what can I tell you? We had some traffic. Yeah. What can they say?
So a group of rulers gets to ignore our rights, take away our money continually, punish us when it wishes, and even send us off to war. And that's all okay because we somehow agreed to the deal. It's a contract, after all. Except it's not. If an adult wants to sign away his rights and make himself a serf to politicians, that's his choice, and I won't take it from him. But for the deal to be legit, a clear agreement and authorizations on both sides are required. A contract, again, from Wikipedia, is the following, quote, an agreement having a lawful object entered into voluntarily by two or more parties, each of whom intends to create one or more legal obligations between them. The elements of a contract are offer and acceptance by competent persons having legal capacity who exchange consideration to create mutuality of obligation. A social contract fails this standard in multiple ways. In fact, it's not a contract in any rational sense of the term, and if it's not a contract, then the use of that word is fraudulent. Now, fraud is the false representation with the intent of persuading a victim to part with property, and that is precisely what's being done with the social contract, and on a gigantic scale. We have a supposed contract, and we have trillions of dollars changing hands based upon its legitimacy. If in fact it is not a contract, then the entirety of the arrangement is a massive criminal fraud. So is this social contract legitimate? Let's examine some crucial aspects of contracts. 1. Competence. In order to agree to a contract, one must be competent. You cannot, for example, make a contract with a hungry 5-year-old, trading a few candy bars for a third of the child's lifetime earnings. The child is not competent, and any such agreement is rightly considered invalid. The social contract, however, is held to be binding upon us from birth. Well, how is that possible? Can an infant do what a 5-year-old or a 12-year-old cannot? Verdict: the social contract fails on this point. Voluntary agreement. A contract must be agreed to. I was never given a choice to sign or reject such an agreement, and I doubt you were either. There can be no contract at all without a voluntary agreement.
Now, don't they say, the suggestion is that if you decide to be in a certain place, that you have a certain set of obligations. For instance, you walk into a restaurant, you sit down, you eat, and you have an obligation to pay, even though it's not explicitly stated,
that's
right?
True. Yeah. You don't get an instruction book.
And so, I mean, that's societal, not really
cultural.
It's social, right? I mean, you know, you might even be able to make the argument in court that, hey, look, I didn't know what was going on here.
Everyone was just being very nice.
I just sat down. They gave me stuff. I sat down. I got some water. They asked me if I'd like anything else. I said, do you have a grilled cheese sandwich? They said yes. They brought it to me. I didn't look at the menu. I didn't even see there was prices next to it. What do you want from me?
So we'll continue here. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. Well, how's that different from the social contract then? What you're describing?
That's my question. Yeah. Is how is it different?
Let's talk about that coming up here in moments. We'll also go through a few more points about the social contract. Your thoughts are welcome. So we've been talking about the social contract, and I want to get back into that here. But, Mark, you had brought up an interesting point in the last hour about this discussion we were having about the social contract. It's not a real contract because it doesn't meet the definition of contract. And the article over at kcresearch.com is going into the details there, but pointing out that you have to be competent in order to enter a contract. You can't have a small child entering into an agreement because they don't know what the hell they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. It has to be voluntary. You can't put a gun to somebody's head and then, have them sign on a dotted line and say that that's a legitimate contract. That person was forced into it. And there's a few more points that we haven't gotten to yet. But Mark, you had said that. Well, what about what about going into a restaurant? I mean, there's no set of instructions. You don't sign a contract when you walk in the restaurant to say that I agree that I will sit and I will be quiet and be courteous to my fellow restaurant eaters, and that afterwards I will pay the bill when it comes, and I understand all of these terms. And that's kind of the point you were making. Isn't that essentially tantamount to the government's social contract? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that what you were saying?
To some extent, I would say that that is an argument that I have heard for the social contract.
Hey, wait, there's a big difference between eating in a restaurant and agreeing to some nebulous, not actually on paper social contract. I mean, the eating in a restaurant, that's not on paper either, but at least
So what is the difference?
Well, the owner of the property, it's being the owner of a thing that gives you the right to make rules about a thing. So, like, if you own a business, you should have the right to decide what the rules are inside that business. And so if your rule is you'll serve people and then they pay, well, that's your rule, and you own the property, so it's legitimate to enforce that rule. But with the social contract, people claim, well, you're on this property, this property owned by the state, and so you have to abide by the state's rules. But I don't think the state acquired the land or the property legitimately. I don't think they're the legitimate owner, so they don't get to make the rules about the thing.
I think it's interesting.
That's a good point.
It's a good point. It's so the state when we're talking about the United States, one thing's for certain: the United States has its moral authority or whatever it might be based on winning a war, right? Like, the continental folks fought a war against the king who had whatever right to the people's the fruits of the people's labor, and then they won the right to the fruits of those people's labor or the land they're on, or I'm not exactly sure what, because the government claims the right to your labor, the right to your land, and then sort of the right to do whatever the hell it wants beyond that too. So there's these two aspects, and then there's this third nebulous aspect. And I think the best argument to me against the social contract is, what is it? Like, I just want to know the provisions of the contract. Like,
what are the terms?
Right. I need to know the terms.
The terms are you do what they say or else.
That's what the terms are. And if nobody will tell you that, because that doesn't sound like a social contract at all. That sounds like social servitude. It sounds like they're claiming rulership and ownership of you and I. Now, if that were the terms, let's go ahead and lay them out. But I don't need to be lied to you by you stinking people. That's how I feel.
That's an interesting point, because at least if you were to go into the restaurant, you could ask, okay, well, this is a social contract, and what are the terms? Well, the terms are you're going to pay the bill at the end. You're going to order things. You're going to be behaved.
You're going to behave yourself. You're going to eat your food. You're going to leave in a timely manner. You're going to pay your bill. You're not going to make too much of a mess.
Whereas with the social contract, if you even could get the list of terms, which of course would be impossible because, it would be as long as all the tomes of law out there that would be impossible to read. But it would always change too, right? Like, because every year laws are changing. There's always new laws being added, and so it's not even like a firm thing. If it even was at one point, it's constantly being modified. The toll-free number here is 855-450-FREE, but yet you're supposed to know what all the terms are? Free Talk Live. We've been talking about the social contract, and what does it really even mean? Isn't it just total BS? That's the argument here from KCResearch.com. The author of the story is Paul Rosenberg. He says the social contract is a fraud, and anyone trying to enforce it is acting criminally. You're welcome to give your thoughts at 855-450-FREE. Of course, I don't remember signing any kind of social contract. No one ever has. It's a ridiculous claim that is a claim made by those who support the state as their reason for why things are the way they are. It's a social contract.
It kind of explains things. It says that, man gives up a certain amount of man's freedom in order to live in Congress with other men.
It's the cost of living in a civilized society, right? The obedience.
And I think that there's an argument for that, but what we call that is manners. And the idea of giving superpowers to the government, because I think that
social contract is not about manners, it's about obedience. It's about doing what you're told.
Right. Well, they guise it in manners, though. Like, you're a good person if you give money to this inefficient organization that doles out money to a bunch of, lazy people and powerful corporations. And if you don't do that, you're bad.
Or if you even just call out the thieves, like I did with the parking enforcer video, you're a bad person. Even people within the Liberty Movement are critical of that video. Also, Derek, classic video involving you and me with the lady who's the crossing guard, one of the most unpopular videos that we've ever produced, and it's still something that people bring up as evidence of how awful of human beings we are, because we should apparently just stand by quietly as you in this case were attacked by this woman, physically assaulted. Apparently we're just supposed to not say things about that and not record video of being attacked.
Yeah,
if
well,
they're old.
I guess I consented to that without knowing it. That's
part of the
thing
contract.
Right.
That the old women could come up and hit you with stop signs anytime
Apparently,
they want.
that's part of the thing that really confuses me about the social contract is that despite my insistence that I do not agree, I am constantly told by proponents of the social contract that yes, I do.
You have agreed. Now, I think that what's important about that video with that old woman is that for me, I didn't change my opinion on that video until I realized Derek J was just trying to get some shots of some kids crossing a street with a crossing guard, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. Like this old lady just went bananas.
Sure.
She had a story that she'd created in her mind about government bureaucrats being harassed by people with cameras. So when somebody wants to get a shot so that they can create a montage, a video, create a movie of just some kids, and including some B-roll of some kids.
It's like a news package, like what you would get with a typical local news. I was practicing for a local news show that we did here in Keene at the time.
Would she have swatted somebody who was carrying a camera from WMUR?
Probably not, because those are big cameras and they're much more intimidating. But I think the point you're making, Mark, is while it can be true, is not necessarily always the case. So, for instance, a lot of people are just afraid of cameras. A lot of people. It doesn't matter that they have a narrative about being a government bureaucrat.
I don't know what her narrative was.
Right.
But he wasn't doing anything to her.
But there's a video. But
most people say, you went up and you were hassling that lady. And no, you weren't. And that's important for people to confront in their minds. If that's what you believe, you are GD wrong.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning of the video in question, all that happens is Derek turns his camera on, and then he says hello to this woman, and then she turns around and swings at him and yells.
But she looked at him first, and that's why he greeted her with hello.
Okay. Well, regardless, some people believe that there was some sort of prelude to this wherein we were harassing her or something on the side of the road, which, of course, wasn't the case at all. But nonetheless, my point was going to be that whether she had some sort of narrative in her mind about cameras and being a government agent, I don't think is necessarily the case. There are just some people who they just don't like being recorded. There was a YouTube channel I was watching recently where their gig, apparently, is to just go walk down a public street recording video.
Yeah.
And they're not trying specifically to record one person or another. They're just simply going and recording their day as though they were just walking down a downtown street, recording the process of walking down a street. And eventually they just come across people who just take a personal issue with the fact that somebody has a video camera out recording them.
People are freaking out over this Google Glass thing, right? Like somehow you're part of the NSA spying on them or something like that. I don't know. But I think it's very interesting. This is a question America needs to, and the world's going to need to come across at some point. And the question is do I, as a free, whole, and sovereign individual, have the right to record my day? That what I do during my day, do I have the right to record that? And
not in some places, no. If you're making a phone call here in New Hampshire, you do not.
You have a right is something that comes from within, not the dirty, stinking, lying politicians writing that crap down.
Okay.
That's really important for us to distinguish. So the question is, do I have the right to do that? Or do people on the street whom I've never met, who are out in public, who, didn't know that I was going to be recording out there, do they have the right to be blurred out? Do I
stop you?
Do I have do I have to edit the video? Do I have to put in all these extra hours to edit the video? They don't even know what I'm going to do with the video. Who are these people, and what is it? What's their expectation of wandering around out in public? I don't know.
I don't know either.
It's a question that people need to answer. Who has the right here?
Share your thoughts at 855-450-FREE. From my experience with some of these people who are very don't record me type folks. And look, I don't really generally have an interest in recording you. If you're just the average person on the street and you're going about your business, you're not interesting to me as far as my camera is concerned. But at the same time, if I wanted to make a video about me walking down the street and show how beautiful Keene's downtown was or something like that, and somebody took an issue with that, I would not stop recording at that point because I was there for a different purpose. And then that person took an issue, and then they made the video, which was just going to be a nice tour of downtown Keene, into a video about this a-hole who has a problem with me recording.
Yeah, this is a weird one, and this one's particularly interesting for me because I record so much of my daily activities and then upload them.
You call it like the Truman Show or something, right?
Yeah, I say it's like the Truman Show for liberty.
Right.
But the problem is that in a real libertarian free society, there would be property rights firmly defined, so it would be clear who owns the property that I'm recording on. And so I wouldn't be on public property. There would be no tragedy of the commons to dispute, like, you can't take my picture here. I would say, oh, really? Let's talk to the property owner. And then it would be very clear. The McDonald's or whoever would say, yeah, he's allowed to record.
Well, there is, I mean, if you claim that the state's the property owner, and I think that there's a valid argument for the state being the, at least there's an understandable argument for the state being the property owner. The state's pretty clear. You can be recorded if you are out in public.
Toll-free number tonight, 855-450-FREE. That doesn't stop people from getting upset, and in some cases getting violent. Derek J. was attacked. His camera was broken over just simply recording some video in a public place. And some people get really upset about it, as though they own the photons that are coming into your camera lens, as though they should have some ability to control that when they're out in public. It's ridiculous. More coming up. If you've signed the social contract, we would love to know what the terms are. Give us a call and let us know, because nobody in this studio has ever seen it. The toll-free number is 855-450-FREE. But from what we can discern, the terms are actually fairly simple. They are, you do as we say, we being the people calling themselves the state or city.
The administrators of the social contract.
You do as we say, or else we do whatever we want to you. That's pretty much how it works, as I understand it.
I think that's pretty accurate.
So you can share your thoughts here. We still haven't gone through the full piece on the contract here from caseyresearch.com, where Paul Rosenberg is saying that it is a fraud and anyone enforcing it is acting criminally because, first of all, it's not a contract, and he's kind of going through the different aspects of contracts and why it is a social contract, this supposed agreement between you and the government, that there's no evidence actually exists, why it's not actually in point of fact a contract, that it's you have to be competent in order to sign a contract. And the claim about the social contract is you've been subject to it since birth. So clearly you weren't competent to engage in or to enter in the contract.
I never learned about this before delving into like libertarian theory. Where do people learn about the social contract to start with? Is it a
Probably
class I
college.
missed in school or something?
No, I'm sure that I had it mentioned in high school, but I'll bet you college is where it really gets...
There was like a time when the teacher put on the board, okay, social contract.
I don't remember
Here's
that either. It didn't come across my purview until I started doing things that the people in the state didn't like, and then at some point someone told me that there's a social contract that justifies it.
That's sort of how it came up, and I wonder how everyone got on the same page about this thing if there's no like class about it or
Well, it's
anything.
more of like an excuse that the intellectuals can use once someone starts to think for themselves. Oh, it's a social contract.
You just don't understand.
You can't step out of line. You're contracted to behave.
Yeah.
Whereas most people will behave because they've been, doing the Pledge of Allegiance obediently, told to do what the police say, and, all this time they've been inside the government indoctrination system. So most people aren't trouble. They're not a problem, and they don't even have to be told about the social contract. They're just obedient enough to where they don't need to know about the idea.
But it seems to stem from academia, though. This is where it gets most of its justification. It's not
I think so.
Okay. All right.
So let me continue here with the story from caseyresearch.com. And again, you're welcome to comment toll-free at 855-450-FREE or via Skype. Skype username here is lrn.fm. So it fails on the competence point in that children purportedly cannot contract. And so therefore, if you're an infant and you're purportedly getting into the social contract, then that doesn't make sense. It's also not a voluntary agreement because contracts must be agreed to. The social contract fails on this point as well, considering you are entering into it under duress. And that's the next point, that a contract must be agreed to without duress, that is, without the threat of harm. The standard objection to my agreement point above is that people agree to the social contract by their actions. If you use anything provided by a government, you are automatically agreeing to the entire social contract. This line of argument fails in several ways. Entrapment, for starters, following by being informed. But the largest issue in my mind is that of duress. To get out of the social contract, we are told, we must leave the ruler's territory. That places the ruler's rights above our own as a starting point, which voids any semblance of equal justice. But I'll pass up that discussion for today. Leaving the ruler's territory means spending large amounts of money, a tremendous amount of time to make arrangements, leaving our jobs behind, leaving all our friends behind, and leaving our entire families behind.
And they don't always give you permission to do it.
That's true. If you can't afford the leaving fee, you're stuck. In other words, we can only escape the social contract.
The social contract sounds a lot like a safety dance because you have to leave your friends behind.
In other words, we can only escape the social contract by undertaking difficult, expensive, and heartbreaking actions. Imagine a Fuller brush salesman coming to your door and offering you an assortment of brushes for $30. Then, when you politely decline, he pulls out a gun and says, "No, if you don't want the deal, you have to abandon your house. Either pay me or leave."
And this is really what goes on. So there are all kinds of schools in your town, your municipality. Many of those schools ask you to voluntarily send your kid there or to attend there or whatever. And a few of them say, if you don't fund us, we will take your house away. This is exactly what he's talking about. Yeah. Now, you can claim that the government that we, the people, have an obligation to the children if that's what you wish. However, what you can't claim is you'd be hard-pressed to claim that the public school system's a good system for administering that. If you want a means-based, by that I mean, you want poor people, a means-based scholarship program, let's talk about a means-based scholarship program. Don't talk to me about middle-class government welfare babysitting services that we call public schools.
Is the salesman's demand criminal in this case?
Yes.
If so, the social contract is criminal as well. Both seek to secure agreements by using duress. Verdict: the social contract fails both legally and on the grounds of cruelty. Next point: undue influence. Undue influence involves one person taking advantage of a position of power over another person.
Yep.
Clearly, this applies to the social contract. First, we are compelled to attend schools run by the other party to the contract. These institutions teach us that the social contract is the way of the world and that any competing ideas would be crazy. And we are held in their classrooms 5 or more hours per day, more like 8 hours when I went to school, beginning at 5 years old and running until adulthood. If nothing else, consider the daily Pledge of Allegiance and try to count the number of times you were made to recite it. On top of that, the other party employs legions of armed men and authorizes them to violently subdue those who oppose them and their rules. If these things are not undue influence, then nothing is. You can't indoctrinate the other party, hold a sword to his throat, force him to sign, and still call it a contract. Verdict: the social contract fails here as well. And finally, mutuality of obligation. With no mutuality of obligation, there can be no contract. If the other side of the contract
is your favorite part, isn't it?
Is not meeting their obligations, there must be recourse. After the U.S. government failed to protect New Yorkers on 9/11, all 8 million of them should have been entitled to a refund. Clearly, the other side of the deal failed to meet their obligations. That, of course, didn't happen. The loss of their rights only got worse. And then we have the doctrine of sovereign immunity, which removes all the most serious consequences from the other side of the deal. There is no mutuality of obligation in the social contract. Therefore, it's not a contract, meaning that you're obligated to do everything they say, but they're not even keeping their side of the so-called bargain with the whole "we're going to protect you" thing. Because that's supposedly the deal, is they're going to protect you in return for you doing what they say.
So what do you get? What do they...
You get whatever
offer.
They feel like giving you at any given moment. And they will do certain things in order to maintain the appearance of legitimacy. That's why the police will arrest some people from time to time for actually committing crimes. I mean, they're out there. They want people to think that there's legitimacy to this.
They take over legitimate services offered that are offered in the marketplace at some point, and
like the roads.
Well, the roads
or
are
catching
a great
murderers. That's an important one.
Well, roads were originally owned privately here in the United States. I mean, that was the way it was. People made roads and charged tolls for them.
Subways too. Subways did a great job privately.
Absolutely. Garbage pickup services. I'm sure that they had I know they had private garbage pickup services that got socialized, as it were. Power delivery.
For the common good, Mark.
All these things.
Right, so they take these things over.
And then they say, look, see, we're magnanimous. Now, of course, they tend to charge more. They tend to give worse customer service. But it's been done this way for so long that they say, well, what about the roads?
Sure.
You know, they say, look, without us, you wouldn't have these things that they took from the private market in the first place, charities too, because now many people feel that they have given everything they need to give to charity simply because they pay their taxes. And this is
dangerous.
It's ludicrous. I mean, obviously there's poor people all over the place.
Well, it's not just that. It's that the money that they would be giving, they're giving so much more money to government, and it's being wasted. If they would just withhold it and give it to those charities,
that's
they'd be doing much better.
Of any organization that's run privately over a public organization is it's going to be more efficient.
Well, the aura of legitimacy is so effective. They've got the government schools that indoctrinate, as this article points out.
They've got parades.
They've got parades. They've got all kinds of things that that indoctrinate people.
Songs.
But also, they've got decades as well.
I'd like to point out that I'm a fireman, so I see a lot of news stuff.
Oh, you get parades too.
The stuff goes by in the Facebook feed of the firemen, right? And some firemen died recently. And I know that these guys do go into harm's way. There's no doubt about it. But they're doing their job. They get paid reasonably well. They get 20 years to retirement. And look. Nobody has a parade for advertising executives or cameramen or talk show hosts when they get killed in the line of duty.
Discussing the aura of legitimacy that the government people are so concerned about protecting. That's one of the reasons why activists like Derek J. and myself, who sort of openly challenge the system in a lot of different ways, civil disobedience, non-cooperation, that's very threatening to the authority of the people calling themselves the state, and that's why we'll get punished a lot harsher in some cases than even certain violent criminals will. All right, so let's continue here. We were talking about the aura of legitimacy and how important it is to the state to protect this thing. The social contract's kind of tied in here as well, the idea that this is somehow legitimate, where they get to make up all the rules and you have to follow them, or else you'll get thrown in a cage or possibly shot or worse. And one of the things that they are so effective at, and one of the reasons why their legitimacy is so firm, is they've been at it for a long time. I mean, this whole state thing is an idea that's been around for many hundreds of years. And in the case of the United States, that particular idea of the state has been around for a couple hundred plus years at this point. And so they've got a lot of time on their side. And so when we, the activist types, go out there and challenge people's preconceived notions about what the state is and what is really happening. For instance, just look at parking enforcement. The common objection is that it's all starting from zero. That me going out there and following around a parking enforcer and putting coins in the meters, and then the parking enforcer getting upset about it and freaking out, as she recently did on a video, and then we can play that here in a little bit if we get a chance. But the parking enforcer flipping out, they look at the parking enforcer and they empathize with her, and they say to themselves, well, gosh, if I was at my job and there was some guy following me around with a video camera asking me questions, I wouldn't like that very much. And
what a jerk.
Right, so I can understand this person is thinking, I can totally empathize with this woman and why she's feeling that way. She's just there doing her job. She's just trying to make a living. She's making an honest living. She's just doing her job.
Yeah, and shouldn't you be following the golden rule by treating others the way they want to be? You would want to be treated. You wouldn't want to be treated that way. You wouldn't want to be followed around with a video camera and harassed.
Indeed. So their perspective all starts from as though everything is just fine normally. They don't see the parking enforcer as being a enforcer, as being somebody whose job it is to go around and threaten people. They don't see the tickets as a threat, even though many people feel terribly when they receive one.
Right, and these tickets, I think that's the biggest thing that, they call them fines. They're associated with having done something bad or wrong. But these are the people that are doing the bad, wrong thing.
These meaning the parking enforcers?
Indeed, if there's two empty spaces on either side of you, suggesting the parking, the reason that they claim this whole parking thing's there is to
turn over.
Right. Is to sort of make sure that there's enough spaces for everybody, and B, keeping the people that live on Main Street from parking where they shouldn't be parking, which essentially is then again trying to keep the spaces open for people. And if you're wanting that, then why would you incentivize somebody from parking downtown by giving them a ticket when there's two spaces on either side of them?
Because it's revenue.
It's because it's revenue.
I thought it was revealing in the video that the young lady who stands up for the parking enforcer says she's just doing her job to you, and you point out that her job is stealing cars from people, and she gets really confused at that. Like,
ultimately, that's what, and I probably could have better communicated in that case, but I'm literally.
But you had to be brief,
right? I'm literally running, trying to fill meters, and also trying to record at the same time. So the videography isn't the greatest in this particular video. It's hard to do all of those things at once.
Yeah, but I thought it was great that you at least pointed that out, because it made her think. She was just taking the parking enforcer's side, not really thinking about the issue. But then when it was brought up that this person steals cars, like, well, yeah, maybe that is wrong.
It's sort of like how we were talking about the other day about 9/11 and how a lot of Americans believe that it all began on 9/11, that there was nothing that precipitated the attacks that happened on 9/11. Wait, they don't even know about the U.S. government's meddling in Middle Eastern countries for decades prior to that. Like, that wasn't a factor. It's just
they never heard of the Iranian passenger jet that was shot down by U.S. Warships without an apology, mind you, where hundreds of people were killed by the United States government, hundreds of innocent civilians killed in like 1989 or 1887 or 88 or something like that, and no apology was issued. I wonder if there's any animosity from the Iranian people over that.
So it's kind of similar to this viewpoint that some people have about parking enforcement or the police or whatever. I'm only using parking enforcement because it's recent and it's fresh, it's happened here. But the idea being that, our perspective here on Free Talk Live is that the government doesn't legitimately own anything, and I don't want to put words in you guys' mouth, so please, correct me if I'm not speaking for you in this case. But a thief cannot own the bicycle that he steals.
I think that governments can own things. I would, however, claim that a government that takes things by force is a thief, and thieves don't legitimately own the things that they own.
So what you're talking about, Mark, is the theoretical future government you'd like to see that doesn't use coercive force on people.
I don't know that it's necessarily futuristic. I think that insurance companies...
It doesn't exist today, though.
I think insurance companies could be called government agencies because they govern... They create a relationship that they then govern over.
Huh. I like that. That's interesting.
I think that we do have voluntary governments that protect us in many ways that the government doesn't. And watch out, by the way, they don't like it when somebody else claims to protect you, so they're liable to take that over and nationalize it all.
Right, okay. So I guess I should use the term the state then for this conversation, right? Because the state, as we know it, has always used violence to attain its ends. And
well, I'm curious why that point isn't driven home more often. Everybody knows that the state didn't acquire its property justly.
I don't know if they know that.
Everybody knows about the Pilgrims and the Indians and the smallpox blankets.
I don't think they care.
Everybody knows that the North American land was not acquired justly.
That
it was
may
not
be
a
true,
fair trade.
But they don't care about it. They assume that it's legitimate now that as many years have gone past.
Well, why? Because time has passed?
Yeah.
So that's a reason?
That's what I'm saying. The state has time on its side. And they have decades of obedience and decades and generations upon generations of obedience. And so that's what they're going on here. So when we point out the illegitimacy and the wrongfulness of the enforcement division and what they're doing and stealing and threatening people, they just see it as legitimate. Their viewpoint is, well, you broke the rules. If you didn't want your car stolen, you should have paid the fee. You should have paid for the ticket. Doesn't matter if they're stealing poor people's cars, single mothers. It doesn't matter.
Free Talk Live, 7 nights a week from 7 to 10 Eastern, live on the Liberty Radio Network at LRN.FM.